The oldest surviving Agatha Christie film is, to use its English title, Adventurers Incorporated, based on Christie's second ever novel, The Secret Adversary. Less of a whodunit, but still a mystery, the novel features lesser-known Christie sleuths Tommy and Tuppence. Reportedly, the 1929 German film is a loose adaptation, but more recent ones might be truer to the story. Until the 1980s, Agatha Christie adaptations were largely absent from the small screen. Of course, that's the decade the Poirot and Miss Marple TV series came out, but before them we had several miniseries. Why Didn't They Ask Evans? The Seven Dials Mystery? The Agatha Christie Hour? And Partners in Crime, the pilot of which was based on The Secret Adversary. It's a fairly decent rendition, mostly faithful, if not fully thought through, but not the adaptation I'm going to focus on today. There's a second miniseries titled Partners in Crime, which came out in 2015, starring David Walliams and Jessica Raine. Just to clarify, Partners in Crime was the name of the second Tommy and Tuppence book, a collection of interrelated short stories. The 1980s show was based chiefly on those stories. The 2015 series was adapted from The Secret Adversary and the third Tommy and Tuppence book, N or M, which I will probably cover in the future. Our first introduction to Tommy and Tuppence occurs in 1920 as they meet for the first time since World War I. At this point, they're just good friends. Both are having a hard time finding work, so they half-jokingly decide to start a company called Young Adventurers.
Two young adventurers for hire, willing to do anything, go anywhere. No unreasonable offer of use.
They're overheard by a man named Whittington, who tries to hire Tuppence to impersonate someone. It feels shady to Tuppence, so when Whittington asks her name, she gives him a name she overheard recently.
Jane Finn.
Very clever, young woman.
Unbeknownst to her, Tuppence had overheard Whittington about the same time he'd overheard her, so the name she gave was a name he himself had mentioned. Whittington thinks she's messing with him, so he pays her blackmail money and kicks her out. Shortly afterward, his office is found abandoned. Their curiosity piqued, Tommy and Tuppence advertise to find anyone who can tell them about Jane Finn. The first person who responds is Mr. Carter, who Tommy recognizes as a Secret Service agent he once worked with. Jane Finn, Carter says, was a survivor from the Lusitania, a passenger liner that sank. An important document was being transported on board that ship, and Jane was the last one seen in possession of it. If the document falls into the wrong hands, then criminals could seize control of the country. How relatable. Carter offers Tommy and Tuppence the mission of locating the woman and the document, and they accept. He warns them, however, that an enemy spy bent on world domination is also after the document. No one knows who he is, only his code name, Mr. Brown. Interestingly, the film arrives at this exact same point in the story, but by a completely different route. This iteration of Tommy and Tuppence are already married and in their 40s. They also have a single child named George, rather than the twins Derek and Deborah, who come along later in the book series. George gets sent off to school pretty much right away. Tuppence has insatiable curiosity and a draw to danger that drives Tommy slightly crazy, and they're still in dire straits financially. But that's as far as their character accuracy goes. In fact, for the first several minutes, they're quite annoying, Tommy especially, with how boorish they've made him. My interest is much more drawn to the mysterious woman who seems to have been dragged unwillingly into the spy world by her douche of a boyfriend, who gets killed almost immediately. The woman is chased off, but not before she secretly deposits some item in Tommy's container for his queen honeybee. When Tommy's get-rich-quick scheme involving bees doesn't pan out, he tries asking his uncle, who is Mr. Carter. Meanwhile, Tuppence finds an address in the journal left behind by... Oh, well, I guess they already know who Jane Finn is, and she decides to snoop. This leads to her meeting Whittington. Only here, Whittington is the one who brings up the name Jane Finn, and Tuppence rouses his suspicions when she says she met Jane Finn. This scene, fun and thrilling in the book, becomes really dark really fast as Whittington assaults Tuppence, warning her off and sending a crony to follow her, leading to another chase scene. Tommy and Tuppence bring Uncle Carter up to speed, and since they've already put an advertisement in the paper looking for Jane Finn, Carter decides to hire them to find her. Here we find out that the bad guys in this version are Soviet spies, and the arch-enemy is a political assassin. The ticking clock is the forthcoming assassination attempt of an unknown target. The assassin's codename?
All we know is that he likes to call himself Mr. Brown.
This version of Mr. Carter works for the type of story they've put him in, though personally I prefer the original version, who bears a resemblance to M from the James Bond franchise. "I like him, don't you?" said Tuppence. "He looks so awfully tired and bored, and yet you feel that underneath he's just like steel, all keen and flashing." Likewise, I miss Agatha Christie's characteristically subtle spy games, where the villains are masters of blending in, of committing grand acts with far-reaching consequences, but with no one even noticing. Instead, we get these silly chase scenes that make the bad guys seem incompetent. In the book, Tommy and Tuppence meet Julius Hersheimer, Jane's cousin, who was also searching for her. Julius largely serves as comic relief, mostly through a running gag about how grossly wealthy he is. Personally, I don't think it aged well. He assists Tommy and Tuppence in chasing up leads. One of those leads is a name Whittington mentioned, Rita. Tommy and Tuppence deduce it must be Rita Vandemeyer, another Lusitania survivor. Staking out her house results in Tommy infiltrating a criminal headquarters, where he eavesdrops on a secret meeting and is then knocked out, causing him to vanish for several chapters. Tuppence, meanwhile, makes friends with a boy who works in Rita's building, Albert, who will eventually become Tommy and Tuppence's lifelong sidekick. Through him, she gains employment with Rita and proceeds to spy on her while waiting for word from Tommy. The longer she doesn't hear from him, the more worried she gets. Eventually, she takes Julius to see Sir James Peel Edgerton, a criminologist whom she knows the gang fears might be onto them. Sir James promises to help Tuppence however he can. All at once, Rita somehow sees through Tuppence's disguise. Tuppence manages to get the drop on her, and Rita is just about to give away not only Jane Finn's whereabouts, but also Mr. Brown's true identity, when she sees Julius and Sir James enter, and sheer fright causes her to faint. Tuppence and the men stand guard over her all night, but by the morning, Rita Vandemeyer is dead. Somehow, despite it being physically impossible, Mr. Brown has murdered her. The second half of the book gets increasingly complicated as questions of identity multiply. Who's the real Jane Finn? Who's the real Mr. Brown? Who's really fooling whom? And who's pretending to let themselves be fooled? At the story's heart is Tuppence finally realizing how dangerous the spy world really is, and that despite her earlier claim that she would rather marry for money than for love, she's fallen for Tommy, and dreads that her antics have gotten him killed. Later, after Tommy escapes and Tuppence ends up captured, Tommy has a similar epiphany. Another revelation they share is that their ally, Julius, might be an imposter. After Tuppence and Jane Finn are finally rescued, Sir James confirms this theory. The real Julius is dead, murdered, and Mr. Brown has taken his place. Oh boy. The book version of Julius was basically a cowboy with a trust fund. In the film, he's a lot older and a lot mellower, his personality not so exaggerated.
Don't lose the money.
In the book, he was ludicrously careless with his money. He claims to be Jane's uncle, though later he's revealed to be her lover. Some light flirting occurs between him and Tuppence, but there's no real romantic tension, though Tommy becomes annoyingly jealous and so petulant that by the third episode I was shouting at him to grow the F up. Instead of figuring it out for themselves, Tommy and Tuppence are sent some anonymous photographs pointing them in the direction of Rita Vandemeyer. When I recognized Alice Cridge, I was ecstatic. She's the perfect person to play Rita, someone menacing, frightening, someone who always has the upper hand. They have her get bullied multiple times by one of the cronies. Are you kidding me? She might be a jerk to Tuppence, but she's not in the least bit intimidating. I mean, come on, this is the Borg Queen. You don't tug the ear of the frigging Borg Queen. Oh, also, there's Albert. Albert is now an old friend of Tommy's from the war. His relationship with the Beresfords doesn't develop that much, and he basically functions as their Q, as in James Bond. At one point, he even provides them with tracking devices. In the 50s. Sure. Sir James Peel Edgerton is now a judge instead of a lawyer/criminologist. The crooks aren't thrilled about Rita dating him, but they're a lot less wary of him than they were in the book. There's no general worry about him being the only man capable of taking down Mr. Brown. Otherwise, he's pretty much the same, though, like with Julius, the amount of time he appears in the story is greatly reduced. As for the plot, Up until Rita's murder, there's a ghost of a resemblance between book and film. Tommy still ends up stuck in a house in Soho for a good chunk of story time, and he's still assisted by a woman who works there named Annette. What's confusing to me is that, having read the book, I know that Annette is really Jane Finn, and this is not the woman from the beginning of the film. However, it turns out she's the one who sent Tommy and Tuppence the photos that put them on the trail of Rita Vandemeyer. Rita's murder, while shocking, doesn't carry nearly the same amount of power it did in the book, firstly because we're no longer given to believe she's one of Mr. Brown's top lieutenants. The whole point of her death was to demonstrate the reach of Brown's power. This, along with conversations overheard by Tommy and Tuppence, shows that he's so dangerous even the bad guys are afraid of him. Book Julia suggests there is no Mr. Brown, that he's a boogeyman designed to keep everybody in line, but thanks to Agatha Christie, you can feel his presence. Meanwhile, in the film, one of the villains has to tell us that Brown is scary in order to get the point across. Anyway, after that, the plot deviates from the book completely. In a nutshell, the bad guys discover Tommy and Tuppence's true identities. They threaten George, forcing our heroes to steal a secret document, in the style of Alfred Hitchcock's The Man Who Knew Too Much. The one recognizable book parallel is that Annette provides a clue in the form of a strange word, which leads to what Jane kept hidden. In the book, the word was Marguerite, leading to a certain painting. In the film, the word is Anassa, which is Greek for queen, hinting at the queen bee. Instead of a treaty, the item hidden by Jane is a recording. Julius turns up, threatens the heroes with a gun, and demands the recording so that he can exchange it for Jane. But in the end, the bad guys don't want to get the recording, they want it destroyed, the opposite of the book where the good guys wanted the thing destroyed. Julius is caught, and it doesn't look like he's going to be accused of being Mr. Brown in this version because there hasn't been a single hint in that direction. But then...
I'm Brown.
When I first read this book, like Tommy, I knew that Mr. Brown had to be either Julius or Sir James. That's why Rita fainted when she saw him, and that's how he was able to kill her. I thought, there are only 2 suspects this time. My chances of guessing the murderer are 50-50. I'm sure to get it right this time. But this is Agatha Christie, and she always fools you. Tommy apparently apprehends Julius, leaving Tuppence, Jane, and Sir James to go retrieve the treaty. However, once he has the treaty in his hand, Sir James reveals that he is Mr. Brown. Before he can harm anyone, Tommy and Julius show up and disarm him. Tommy had only pretended to suspect Julius, when in fact a fake note from Tuppence had given him the solution. The note had been signed using the actual spelling of the word Tuppence, but the character spells it phonetically. Julius had seen how Tuppence spells her name, so Tommy knew he must be innocent. Sir James commits suicide, the treaty is destroyed, the coup is prevented, and the entire criminal organization collapses. The book ends with Julius and Jane getting married. Yes, I know they're cousins, try not to think about it. And after some awkwardness, Tommy and Tuppence manage to express their feelings as well. We also get a glimpse into Mr. Brown's psyche through Sir James's diary. The adaptation is less Mission Impossible and more Hitchcock. Tommy and Tuppence figures someone is forcing Julius to say he's Mr. Brown. The only person who had a chance to is Sir James. So, sadly, we miss out on the iconic scene from the book where we think all is well, and then...
I am Mr. Brown.
There's more chasing, an assassination attempt that alludes to an unadapted Poirot story, Tuppence for the first time doing something competently, Tommy saving the day with honey, and Sir James committing suicide after telling us that, unlike in the book, his profession in the law led to him becoming a criminal, instead of the other way around. At the end, Jane and Julius are reunited, and everyone's happy, though the other bad guys are never caught, so I'm not sure how we're supposed to know George is going to be safe. Anyway, Tommy and Tuppence finally embrace their new lives as happily married spies.
Provided we can leave this damn sleuthing behind.
What?
Oh, Tommy, think of all the adventures we could have.
We, my darling, have only just started.
Can I at least have the weekend?
Or Tommy is still a whiny stick in the mud. Either way. Believe it or not, when I sit down and watch a new Christie adaptation, I do really try to just sit back and enjoy it. So when I say I didn't enjoy this one, please don't assume it's because the story went through so many changes. As a comedy thriller, it's not bad. What made it difficult to get through were the characters. This Tommy and Tuppence are not fun to follow. I didn't expect them to be magically good at spy work, but they were so bad at it, it made me cringe. The comedy comes more from laughing at them than with them. Later, when the villains threatened George, I expected Tommy to finally be pushed into some character growth. I thought danger to his son would kick his latent spy skills into gear, proving his worth to his uncle, and more importantly to himself. But when he goes home, he's not even acting like a father would. I might not have kids, but in his place I'd be climbing the walls, not complaining that someone's wearing my sweater. It's an interesting take on the story, but without relatable characters, it just feels like a drag. I won't be covering it soon, but eventually we'll see how the series did with N or M. Thanks for watching.